do it.
Hi, I'm Nathan Martin, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
That's right. Look, I have this network of people that I connect with through an email, listserv kind of thing. I don't even know what listserv means, but that's just the words I say. And we call ourselves the Plazaniacs. And I like to have these guys on because they have really interesting and fascinating lives. Our friend Josh Trevino curates this. You guys should definitely check out the Plaza de Armas on. I'll put a link up here in a second for his writing because he's a genius at writing things. But
He
I
is.
guess today, yeah, he really is. Like he's really a treasure to have to listen to and hear his thoughts. And boy, his command of history is ridiculous. I was like, why do I even bother reading these old books? Because he knows chapter and verse, so many things. He's read the I don't know how he reads all of that and processes it, you know. I'll read something again and I'm like, "Oh, I've been saying this for years. This isn't mine at all." Just, I forget things and everything else. Anyhow, so a hat tip to Josh Trevino. By the way, I'm trying to retire this black number red 6 hat that I got from the Red 6 guys. But because I'm shoveling rocks today, Nathan, I'm using this now become a work hat. So my
Yeah.
hair is very sweaty
Oh,
and everything. So I'm shoveling. I don't know, we have like 14,000 pounds of rocks in our driveway right now, and we got to get them down fast. So I'll be the rest of the day. I'll be shoveling shit.
I know. I don't envy you. I convinced my wife to convert from mulch to stone,
Mm,
but of course, a part of that was me hauling about 17 yards of river rock.
yeah,
But I only had to do it once versus the mulch, which I had to do on a yearly basis, right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so we just got the delivery this morning, and I was like, "Well, no time like the present to get started because these rocks aren't going to move themselves." And I have been so sweaty from doing this that my camera it seems to have stopped now. But I came in like a nuclear reactor, just creating steam everywhere. So if you see me wiping off the camera, that's why, everybody. I want to jump in, Nathan, because one of the things right now Roe v. Wade is being considered by the Supreme Court. This isn't meant to be a political statement; it's just statement of fact.
Yep.
And one of the things we might have to reckon with is how we redefine when and or if abortion is going to be legal at a federal level, at a state level, and everything else. And I'm not trying to have the conversation now.
Hmm.
There's a lot of ethical arguments to have there, but one of the realities is that we do have people that make babies, and we have to figure
Yep.
out what we do when that parent is either not viable or it's like, hey, look, I want to have this baby, but fill in the blank. And there's a lot of options. We seem to, in the zeitgeist, denigrate things like fostering, adopting, and those kind of things. Can we just talk a little bit about the nature of your family without identifying your kids, obviously, and then let's start talking about like what do we do? Like if we want to support this, if we want to just better understand it. How about this? How about tolerate the ability to raise a kid?
Yeah. So, my wife and I have seven years ago, 11 children.
Wow.
6. We have 6 biological. We have 4 that are adopted now. We just adopted our sibling set of 3 2 weeks ago. So
Okay.
that's why in the photo that I showed you, their faces did not have to be blacked out.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and then we have a foster newborn who's medically fragile. We have, so we range from 19 to 7 months. My 19-year-old's getting married this next week, this Saturday. So we're kind of entering different phases simultaneously in our lives. But you're absolutely correct that, unfortunately, there are situations where parents can't parent or choose not to parent. And as a society, we obviously have to deal with that because we have children that are involved.
Yeah.
That's why I get really I don't know, pissed off is the word, but I do get pissed off when people are like, "Well, you're pro-life, so you're just pro-birth," and it's like, I listen. I put a lot of stake in this. I'm
Yeah.
raising other people's children. I volunteered to do that. I've adopted them into my own family, and there's a lot of us that are like that. We're not just pro-birth. We do want to see these children thrive, um, but we also want to see them live. And that's kind of our stance and our background on it. But we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, literally, and be involved. I say it's you know I call it 180-degree pro-life, right? We're just all encompassing. Um, uh, we're trying to be pro-life in all those areas. But yeah, we put our money where our mouth is, and we're foster parents, and but we've been in the system, and the system is not without its defects, right? It's not perfect, but it is something we can improve on, and work to improve on, to at the end of the day, help these children, through their traumas and through um, their the bad things that have happened to them,
Sure.
um, and get them to a point where they're able to thrive within our communities. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We always say, as a foster parent, when the new children come into our lives, it is the worst day of their life, right? We have to understand that. It's the absolute worst day of that. Now, sometimes we think of it as a good day, right? Because, oh, they were in their own feces for 2 weeks at a time, or their parents neglected them, and
Right.
drugs, all this stuff, right? So we think of it like, oh, it's so much better that they're in our home because our home is better. Yeah, but for them, they just got ripped out of everything they knew. They just got torn apart from the only family they've known.
Right.
The relationships that they've built, even and negative as they are, right? So every time that a foster child comes into a foster home, it's the worst day of their life, right? And so that's the basis point. That's where you have to start, and then you have to be informed on the call it trauma informed parenting, but you have to be informed on that, that it's different. It's just different to parent my foster and adopted children than it is to parent my biological children. It is different, you know, and that can be frustrating, for um, that can be frustrating for some people to understand, especially when you're out in a supermarket or you're at church, because people are used to biological children or whatnot, and they're not quite trauma informed on that. So, one thing that Mandy and I are trying to do through our Facebook page and other things is try to let people know that they're not alone with their foster parents, but also encourage people within the community to foster, specifically in the church. We come from a faith background, and if every church in America just adopted and supported the adoption of one child, we basically have no need for adoption in the United States.
Let me jump in
Um,
here. Let me jump in here and say this. So, Fostering Grace on Facebook. There's the at Fostering Grace on Facebook. If you guys want to read up on that, let
yeah,
me ask a couple questions because
yeah, feel
this is
free.
part of the reason to have this, is to have this conversation. So, I knew when I was in the army, I knew a major, just like you, had a big, loving parental heart, and they're like, "We're doing so well. How can we take on some of these kids where we're living?" And it's the army, so a lot of these things can be temporary, but in a short amount of time, you can lend a lot of stability to a young person who needs it. I want to purchase from a different angle first, then we'll come back to the kids.
Yeah,
Sometimes the adult, the parent, just needs a minute, and by a minute, maybe they need 5 years to get sorted out. And the foster system, can be an area, an opportunity, like you know you have this problem legally, whatever, addiction wise, but you can get through it and then, come back and return to a kid that's been cared for and raised well. But I think the foster system has a bad reputation. And then I think these parents that do rebound, we hear about it occasionally, but how often does that happen? Are we good at rehabilitating parents as a society, as a governmental policy measure? Do we do that well?
wow, that's a loaded question. So I think
It's a hard
I
question.
don't,
It's not loaded. I mean, you can do
yeah,
whatever you want with it.
I don't think we do it well. In this case, I think we can always be better. So in Ohio, and again, when I'm talking about our foster journey, really I'm talking about Ohio because that's where we're licensed, that's what we're used to.
Okay.
Different states have different rules and different ways of going about it. But in Ohio, we have reunification as a priority. So when a child is taken from the home, reunification is automatically a priority for that case plan. Now, in the case for us, like we have our June, she's adopted. The sibling set of three we just adopted. That reunification wasn't possible.
Right.
right? So it came down to we were able to adopt them. But reunification is the goal from the onset for these case plans. And because we're trying to help the parents pass their situation to get better. Now, in our case, we didn't have cases of, we haven't had yet cases of abuse. There've been more, more neglect, which can be worse traumatically, by the way. We can get into that. But more neglect and just a lack of circumstances. So, in some foster parents become really embittered towards um, especially if you're dealing with abuse, like that's really hard to try to push for unification and root for the parents to get their children back, right? So our situation has been different in that, to where we can genuinely try, work the plan for unification and try to cheer these folks on. Um, it, but is it successful? A lot of times it um, comes down to the parent, and you know when it comes to drugs, when it comes to having, you know, really it comes down to what is the support system like.
Yeah.
Parents who achieve reunification have a really strong support system. But what we're finding through the opioid epidemic, right, is
Mm.
it's wiping out whole families,
Yeah.
right? So we have record foster care in Ohio because whole family, like, so oh, the child got taken away from the parents, that would go to the grandparents, right, or something like that. But we're seeing through the opioid epidemic, whole families being wiped out to the point that there are no kinship possibilities.
Right.
You know, you uncles, aunts, grandparents, like they're all
Yeah.
addicted, or something's that's not viable, so they have to go through the foster system. Because obviously kinship is kind of, that's where we start, right, and then it kind of progresses from there.
So the other end of this is the kids, right? Whether they
Yeah.
come with this trauma. Look, I mean, again, this major that I'm using as an example, he's like, we took this girl on, and man, it's pushing us past our limit as parents, and we might have to. And this is terrible to say, but they were considering returning the person because
No.
it became, because this wasn't a small kid, this was a teenager, right? But
Mhm.
she was becoming physically abusive, and then that puts everybody in a bad spot because
Yes.
it's a minor. She's not doing this because she's been raised in a great way, right? She's been abandoned and she's hurt and she's lashing out with the only tool she knows. So,
Yeah.
he's like, how do I deal with this? And then if not him, then who? Like, here's this major, he's, a very compassionate man, and it really, it pushed him. And I don't even know the ultimate resolution, because when I left him and that unit, they were still fighting the deal, trying to get that person to calm down. And again, these things can be outbursts. So you might have 3 weeks of calm, and then it builds up to this big storm, and then there's a fist fight with an adult in the house. And
Mm.
it hadn't been him yet, but that's coming, right? And so
Yeah.
how do you deal with these kids that are, I'll just say, unfosterable, for lack of a better term, but there are some of these kids that are desperate for parenting, and you may not be the right blend even, right? And how hard is that on your heart as a foster parent? Talk about that challenge.
It's hard. It's very hard. So our first placement, we got on election day 2016. I mean, funny enough, but and it was a sibling set of three. Now we've adopted June, but the other two were just way past our capacity of what our family could do. It really was. It just stretched us. And we tried. We tried everything, outside help, counselors, getting a nanny, different things. But it was coming to the point where it was becoming an untenable situation for the rest of our family was there too. So you kind of have a split duty. You have a duty to these children, right? To help the state, but you also have a duty to your family, right? Which is why we aligned it, like we wanted younger kids than our biological, right? Because we didn't want to mess up any kind of birth order stuff. We also, having I have 9 daughters, right? So for us to accept a placement for a 12-year-old boy uh, would not be wise. Okay, it wouldn't really fit with our dynamics. So you do have some say in that as far as that stuff's considered. Um, but at the end of the day, um, we had to at the end of the day we had to terminate the placement. So
How does the state push on that to I mean, do they like, look, we're trying to keep the kids together if at all possible, but because there's not enough foster capacity, and I'm just kind of making things up here, but because
yeah,
there's not enough fostering capacity, yes, we see what you're saying. 9 girls, 12-year-old boy. This boy's, physically maturing and, whatever, has a history of abuse in his family. So I mean, how does that all sort out? I mean, how in the world does the state manage that? And again, in Ohio, do you think that they manage it well? Because everybody wants the best interest of the kid, but some of these are not easy problems you guys are taking on.
no, and every county is different as well in how they handle it. I say they handle it the best they can. But I think there's definitely things we can do to make it better, and there's some definite reforms we can do to make it better for the care of the kids too. And especially dealing with like medical stuff, there's definitely stuff we can do better. But to answer your question, so they have a list of foster parents they call, and when they call, they give out every kind of detail that they have. By law, they have to give as much detailed case as they know. Now, sometimes they don't know, right? They may have names. There's been times where foster parents have told us that they were told that it was 3 boys, and then they show up and it's 2 girls and a boy, right? Yeah. So they're doing the best they can with the information they have, but sometimes that can be fuzzy, right? It also depends, like, is this an emergency placement, or is this a family that we've had our eye on and we're trying to work without pulling the children and it becomes untenable. So there's just different things that align for different reasons.
Mhm. When you look at the whole and these are I'd hate to brush by this, but at some point we just have to move on to other things.
Yeah.
But the fostering program, it seems to be a very useful thing. How did you and your wife, how did you guys get to the point where you thought, yeah, look, we have a lot of kids already.
Yeah.
Um, but we have enough parenting capacity to double the size of our family at some point with 13 or whatever. I don't know. I mean, you're talking a lot of people, and then there's this perception, and I don't know if it's accurate or not. So I'm going to ask you that people
Yeah.
foster kids for the money, and I just got to believe that kids aren't cheap, and there's no way the government's like, we're going to give you a $10,000 a month per kid. I
Yeah.
can't see how this can be possible. I imagine you're fighting at all times to raise all these kids, financially
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah. I mean, we get a stipend, but I mean, I will say this, like, if you go to a daycare facility or any kind of preschool or whatever, they're getting a much higher quote unquote stipend than we're getting, right? So we get a stipend to help out a little bit. So it's not as if it's completely on our own. But at the end of the day, it's definitely not enough to where you would go, oh, yeah, give me 5 more kids because, whatever. Uh, you know,
Out of your room. Yeah.
well, at the end of the day, when you have a child who's dealing with trust issues, and so their outlet is punching holes in your wall, when they're destroying stuff, when they're going into siblings' rooms and taking scissors to things because they just don't know how to do proper outlet for their emotions,
Yeah.
when they're sneaking down to the kitchen at 2 a.m. and basically cleaning out your cupboards because they have food trauma in their background. Like nobody in their right mind. Now, I'm sure there's some degenerates, right? But nobody in their right mind is like, oh yeah, please, I will take. Because the bottom line is they don't come as perfectly packaged up little babies to where they all have some degree of trauma that's there, and so yeah, I can't see it. It really has to be a ministry mindset that you're giving to these kids because it is very wearing and taxing to the point. And we know this because the rate of uh, the rate of foster parents who join versus are there after 3 years
Mm,
for their first certifications um, is a precipitous drop, right?
yeah.
That you know.
Raising
So,
any kid is hard, right?
oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
How do you guys develop the tools to deal with food trauma and, look, incestual rape, whatever it's going to be. These are not like minor things. And when I always
Yeah,
talk about the book of parenting, it has about 8 pages. And then the author's like, you'll figure the rest out. And it's all blank pages. You have to fill out yourself, and then you have to staple pages on the back. You're like, I had no idea this was going to be in the parenting book. So let me put this in
yeah.
my book. How do you figure out how to deal with these highly complex things in a house full of people?
So there's something called TBRI, which is trauma based something something. I can't
Robot
remember
Institute.
something. All right.
Okay.
So just if you search TBRI fostering or something like that,
I'll work on that.
the guy who wrote a book is called The Connected Mind. And so when you really have to understand how the mind works, and then all of a sudden a lot of this behavior stuff makes sense. I don't know how we would. So we took classes through this, and they were paid for. So, but we took classes, and after that we were like, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense. And so I would encourage, if you're looking at doing fostering or someone in your audience is already fostering and they're just having problems, feel free to reach out. We have tons of foster parents reach out to us as if we know everything, and we don't. But what we do is we can say, well, we can point you to a book or a resource, and the TBR method really helped us to understand that a lot of this stuff is just baked in, right? So it's basically on the premise, just to go real quick. I know we don't have tons of time, but just to go real quick, if this is your brain, this part of your brain is what you would call the fight, flight, freeze reflex, right? It's I don't know, there's a term for it, but anyways, the bottom line is it's what gets triggered, and we focus on that. Okay, and it's some pretty automatic stuff, right? And then there's this other part of the brain which goes over it, which is we'll call the thinking brain. Okay, where you can actually do complex thought, right? Now, as you can imagine, when you're in a crisis, you really don't do your thinking brain, right? As you can imagine, if you are faced with a gun in your face, trying to analytically think about the best possible way to handle the situation may not be the greatest for your personal safety, right? So that shuts off when we're faced with those things. Well, the problem with a child who's in trauma, in essence, is that they're kind of locked into this, and so we have to be able to get them past that to the thinking part, right? So this is where you go, um, you know, uh, hey, daughter of mine, why did you get up at 2 a.m. to eat? And she says, because I was hungry. Okay, why did like, you're not allowed to go down in the kitchen, but I was hungry. Okay, I was hungry. It doesn't matter at that point that she knows that she shouldn't get up at 2 a.m. It doesn't matter that she knows the rules, because that's thinking brain.
Right.
She's going to get food.
Yeah, this is that
Her
limbic side of the brain, right? The animal brain. Yeah.
her body is like, I need food.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. She needs food, right? And so once you realize that, then you say, okay, so we need to make sure before you go to bed, we need to make sure that you get a piece of turkey. And as right before you go to bed, you get a piece of turkey, so you're kind of full, right? And turkey has like the tryptophan and stuff like that as well. It has some benefits, that, right? So like they get their piece of turkey, and
Yeah.
also, what, in your room we're going to keep a morning snack. It's a snack that sits on the table and it's there, and so there's food there. Right? For some kids, they actually for especially older kids who are still going through food trauma and stuff like that, they will have Rubbermaid totes, and there's like, you can have whatever food you want in this
Oh,
Rubbermaid tote under your bed. Now, most of the time, they don't even touch it. It's just knowing that it's there, right?
yeah. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, there was someone who was talking about TBRI who was an adult, and they're like, I went through food trauma as a youngster. To this day, I get anxious if I'm on a business trip and I don't have a snack in my suitcase. To
It's
this
great.
day.
Yeah.
And it's just,
Right.
I don't even eat the snack, but just having that granola bar in the suitcase and knowing that it's there, it's because it's deep ingrained. And that's why I say, like, trauma is actually harder to deal with than abuse. Abuse is kind of the headline stuff, but trauma rewires your brain. Okay? It actually rewires your brain and how you think. versus abuse. So, that's why they say, like, when you're going through therapy with your child, like dealing with abuse stuff, it's a little easier to deal with that than it is the rewiring of the brain, because some of that stuff will be there forever and ever, ever. Like our daughter, she'll be dealing with this food stuff for the rest of her life. She will. She'll be dealing with that for the rest of her life. And we know that. So it's like, how do we accommodate that? Because
Right.
obviously, like with my biological children, right? I listen, if you get up at 2 a.m., you will not be able to do X, or you're going to get in trouble, or you're going to get spanked or whatever, right? Well, you come to realize, like, this, it- it's you have to be informed on what's actually going on there. And once you do that, it makes it a little easier. Now, it doesn't make it easier when they're up at 2 a.m. ravaging your cupboards, okay? But it makes it a little easier to understand that this child's not being deliberately disobedient, right? That there's something else going on here. So,
Let me ask you this
it
then.
changes
So
your perspective.
how do you differentiate between a young growing football based kid, or whatever, any kind of athletic kid, any kind of boy who's like, I need more milk, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
24/7, right? Because that's not necessarily food trauma, or if those things are combined, good grief, but if you have a kid who's healthy, not
Hmm.
obese and all that kind of thing, how do you deal with that? And then let's also throw in, I know the abuse thing is maybe a little bit easier, but let's not call it easy. If you've got a sexually
No.
traumatized kid whose early promiscuity is going on, and they're busting out of the house, they're look
Yep.
a threat to your other kids potentially, and
Yep.
hey, you have to say this is a real thing. Like, you have to protect your other kids, especially the other fragile ones, from sexual trauma within the house.
100%.
So
Yeah.
those are two things. So how do you unknit the boys, like, I have to have all the ham, and the food trauma kid, and maybe they're blended, and sometimes kids get chunky when they're in high school, and
Yeah.
man, that's hard to figure out. And then, then you have the other one that's promiscuous, and you're like, what on earth are we gonna do?
Yep. I mean, I will say this, and I know there's people listening and probably aren't faith based or anything like that. I don't know how we would be able to deal with it if it wasn't for, obviously prayer, and our faith. So, for example, this food trauma stuff. Um, Mandy, we were at our end of our rope when it came to them just constantly sneaking whatever right there. And Mandy said, I just felt like something in my brain, like, whether it was God's nudging or whatever you want to call it, but you know, hey, why don't we have a morning snack, right? And so, and then that seemed to really help. No,
Mm,
not
mm.
fix it, but it tampered it down, right? So stuff like that. I don't know how someone would be able to survive in these environments without having some of that drawing on their faith, and that, like, it becomes very difficult very quickly. But I also think that's why a lot of a great majority of foster parents who are successful in some of these areas are faith based and have some kind of grounding in faith. Um, and so
Do you know,
it,
is there a number, like, in terms of, I guess I'll call it religiosity? Like, there's one thing saying, well, I am a Christian, but then there's folks that are like, no, no, I mean, I'm at church 3 or 4 times a week. I got kids
yeah,
going to youth group choir. We go, for 4 hours. I'm growing up, my dad, we got there before the greeters, right?
yeah,
Because he had a degree in divinity, he had a degree in music, so church was his scene, and we'd be there for all 3 services, and then go out to lunch, likely with another family. I mean, oh my gosh,
no.
Sunday was a day for,
My
worship.
dad was a pastor too, so
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
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 so it was a
and
different
by the way,
situation
if
growing up.
you go to a Black Baptist church, forget it, that's 8 hours, easy, all the time.
Your Sunday's gone,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
yeah,
all worship, yeah,
it's a day of rest whether you want it to be or not. But
right.
uh, the um, yeah, I don't know. I just know that the statistics and even anecdotally, a vast majority of people are going through this, doing so through faith. But um, I do want to speak a little bit about how we do it too, is because we have a huge support network. So our church is fantastic in this regard. So we actually have a team of adults that supports us as foster parents. So they provide us some meals. They'll come and they'll take the girls to go to the park. They will do some tutoring, after school tutoring for our family. They basically say at the beginning of the week, they say, "Hey, how can we support you?" And it's we have about 5 or 6 families in our group that support us. And so if they have to buy us meals or stuff like that, the church helps actually pay for that and stuff like that. So we're very we're very blessed in that regard because
Mm.
a lot of churches don't have such programs. So, like, if you come to our church and you're a foster family, you will get a support network built in to support you. And it's people who say, "Listen, I can't foster. Okay, there's absolutely no way that I could be able to do that." Like,
Yeah.
some of them are like in their 60s or 70s, right? They're like, "There's no way that I could take on a newborn, right?" But what I can do is I can come play at the park with your 5 littles for 3 hours and give you a little bit of a break. Or we have one lady. She says, I can come and I will vacuum your floors every week, right? Or something. You know what I'm saying? And so, and when Mandy was in the hospital with our little one for an extended period of time, like they came and helped out with laundry and stuff like that, because we have 2 sets of commercial washers and dryers like that, and we
Of course
have
you do.
we
Yeah.
go we go through 5 loads a day, and just
Yeah.
to keep up with their laundry, right?
And a
So,
washing machine and a dryer every 3 years at least, right? Those things just burn out. It's gotta be.
well, we get the super 5-year plan on them,
Okay, good.
so we're one set is probably up for renewal here in the next little bit, but it's lasted us 6 7 years. But that's why we get the commercial grade. We don't
Yeah.
deal in the minors. We have to get
Believe me, a lot of my family's Mormon. Anytime any part of your family is Mormon, a lot of your family is Mormon, and there's a lot of washing and drying of things and bandages. Oh my god, you could just open your own CVS, you know.
yeah,
I want to push you now because I want to challenge the narrative a little bit
yeah,
because we we know that the faith-based organizations are pretty good at this, right? Like we depends on your church's specific mission. Maybe they're doing work in the inner city, maybe they're doing work in a sister city and in other places. But the folks who aren't in the religious side, they do this in different ways. And
mhm,
it look that whole it takes a village does take a village, whether it's a church or a group of friends. So we had a guy named Dr. Ian Jenkins on the show, and he and 3 dudes have legal custody. They are what's called a thruple. And so it's not an open relationship, but it is non-traditional. And they have at least the last time he was on the show, he has 2 kids, right? And when you hear them talk about their life, what you hear are kids that are surrounded by love, the maternal, what do you call them? Like the birth mothers are part of the family. They have this powerful support network. And so it's easy to like dismiss and say, like, wait, there's 3 dudes living together, and this doesn't sound right. But then when you hear them describe, and Ian describes like what they do all the time and how much love is around their kid and support, you're like, hey man, you're raising kids surrounded by love and people that are there to support one another. I personally have no problem with that. Is there a direct path to doing this stuff well? Can a throuple be as thriving as, like, okay, let's say those guys are like, and again, they have legal custody. 3 parents have legal
yeah.
custody. Groundbreaking. If they wanted to start fostering and they have the capacity, he's a doctor, they have enough money and everything to do all that stuff. Does that work in the foster system, or is that a bridge too far for right now that to have 3 dudes in a relationship fostering kids?
Well, I don't know about that specific, right? But I do know, like, when we were going through foster training and people are coming in, there are people that were single and just wanted to help out, and there's no real requirements for you to be even a couple. Um, I Obviously, from my background, I feel that the best situation for a child is always to have a mother and a father. Okay.
Sure.
However, I'm also in foster care, right? We we're not dealing with best
Yeah.
situations,
And it sounds like you need some
right?
help
It
across the
it
board.
was it wasn't a best situation for our children to come to us in the first place. They came to us out of a situation. So we're trying to make beauty out of ashes, right? That's what we're trying to do. So is that best done in a situation where there's a mother and a father? I would argue yes. But I don't want to. The current foster system is not based off of perfection being the enemy of the good, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And then what is the success rate? I mean, do you have to you and your wife have to remind yourselves like, "Hey, some of these are just not gonna work, and maybe we're not the parent for that parent." I mean, that it's gotta break your heart to pour this much love into a kid and then just have that kid continue to flounder when you're waving by as they drive off in that car, you know? I mean, how successful can you be realistically? Sure, you want every single kid to come out and leave in
Yeah.
better condition, and maybe better is the answer, but there's no way you do that for any length of time and don't have a kid. You're like, we just can't figure this kid out.
No, I mean, you do the best you can, and at some point, you have to realize I'm my goal. My so for me, my job isn't just the best I can for that child. My is the best I can for the entire family. So it's a balancing act,
Right,
you
right.
know. Um, and for the most part, I think our children have understood that. But we've been very inclusive of our biological children in these decisions. When we had to terminate a placement, we came to the agreement as a family that this was the best move for our family.
Yeah,
And of course, the kids are like, "Oh no, we can keep." But then you start digging deep, and they're like, "Oh, this is really tough, and this is tough, and this is hard." Like, and it is hard. And our kids naturally have been exposed to bad things in the world that they normally wouldn't have been exposed to at 11 and 13 and 15. A lot of times, suburban kids, they're kind of in this bubble of like everything's perfectly peachy. Well, okay, but why do why do our um, why do our sisters who happen to be African American, why when they see a police officer do they run? And
yeah,
okay, well, let's have that conversation. Let's see, and and our police department has been great. So they've actually they we were able to go and do a tour and like, hey, this is what police officers do, and like, see, like this, he's actually one of our neighbors. Like he's here to actually help you, right? That comes from something. I don't know where it comes from, right? Because they came to us relatively young, but it comes from somewhere. And so being able to have those discussions with your children, like there's a whole other world that exists outside of yourself,
yeah,
right? But
yeah.
but it's been
Yeah,
refreshing. It's been refreshing to be able to walk with them in this journey of
yeah,
there is a world outside ourselves. And now, like my oldest daughter, she wants to help out with uh, pregnancy centers, and she wants to help people and kids with social services and stuff like that, and write grants and stuff like that. That's what she wants to do. And so it's been really neat to see them as they grow up. Like
yeah.
they're like, well, I want to help. I want to be a therapist. You know, I want to be a helper
Right.
because there's a lot more kids like my sisters.
So you're fostering more fostering capacity, and that I think is a wonderful thing. And I know you, we've met now, that kind of thing. So it's a good overall, societal good to have families like yours out there, and hopefully multiplying those to get as many of these kids on as much stable footing as we can get them. What's um what's the Martin family at their worst with this challenge?
Well, I mean, we're at our worst on a regular basis. It's a crazy. Listen, we have a circus. It's chaos, and it's just like
Yeah,
I don't know what best is. To be honest with you,
seriously.
we just try to do the best we can. And I tell like the Facebook page we have, like, there's been a couple stories like Mandy won't post them, and I keep on convincing her. I trying to get her to post them. Like one story, she'll kill me for telling the story, but like we're driving home from school, and all of a sudden we open up the door, and there's June, and she has like a pile of poop in her hand, right? And it's like, and she's like, well, I couldn't hold it, and it's like literally in a ball. Okay. I was like, you need to post that. She's like, no, I can't post.
Yeah.
People think we're crazy as it is.
Oh,
And
you're
I
crazy. That's for sure.
yeah, and yeah, but that's fine. Like, I want people to say, you know what? I don't want people to think that to foster, you have to have it all together,
Yeah.
or you have to have a perfect situation, or you have to have all this money, or you have to be independently wealthy, or no, like we need people to be engaged with the fostering community of
Yeah.
all stripes. People that don't look like me and don't act like us, and that's fine. We need to have that all, because at the end of the day, we have a lot of kids who are really hurting, who need a mom and a dad. They need that stability. They need to understand and have someone walk through that trauma with them, you know, because it's not going to be cured. You're not going to magically
Right.
fix a lot of this trauma and stuff like that, but you can walk alongside of them, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
It definitely is. You're picking things that are purposely harder, but parenting in general is hard. I mean, how many of us get to high school or like the high school graduation for our kid, right? And I always say this to like parents and kids, like high school graduation is for the parent. Yeah, you're having a great time and all that kind of stuff, but we're like, I can't believe we pulled this off. Oh, I mean, you're like, how did you get through eighth grade? We all had to work so hard. Like when I got through eighth grade, like I had just absolutely screwed it all up for a lot of good reasons, right? Because mostly I was in eighth grade and I had to sit down and I just had to do a bunch of paperwork, paper, right, problem, essay for like, I don't know, 2 whole weekends, which in retrospect is nothing, but they let me make up all the stuff that I hadn't done and I was able to get through. But I mean, that's a skin of the teeth graduation, right? And when that kid gets there senior year and you're like, you are an absolute idiot. But like my daughter's great, hardly ever gave us a problem ever, right? And she kept putting her graduation into someone else's hands. And I'm like, you have to just do this. If you don't do this, now you're relying on some lady you don't know to cut you a break. And then
Yep.
if she won't cut you the break, then I have to call and be like, hey, I'm going to be that parent right now. And how do we make this, so any kid, whether they got poop in their hand or not, like we've all had that, but you guys have something that's even harder. How sweet are the reward? Sorry, excuse me. How sweet are the rewards when it does work out?
Well, I mean, ours are still young, so I don't know if they will work out or whatever. But at the end of the day, when someone comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, Dad, can I just want to cuddle with you?"
Yeah.
Because one of ours, high trauma, like she needs that to decompress, and she chooses you to cuddle with to kind of decompress because she learned to actually say that,
Yeah.
right? She wasn't doing that. She was putting holes
Victory.
in walls, or she was kicking, or she was screaming, or
Yeah.
she was just throwing a fit. But she realized something's not right. I need to regulate. Oh, I can go and cuddle,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And that will help. That helps me regulate,
Let me.
right?
All right, I want to jump in again. I love this. This is when
Yeah,
it's so sweet and you get the rewards. Let's pull back out of the fostering system and let's look
yeah,
at there's an organization called Advanced Peace, right? And yeah, whenever they write about them in the news, they write paying criminals cannot commit crime, and that is a tiny aspect of this whole case management thing, right? But basically, what they do primarily is they take former life sentence criminals who've gotten out, who are from the streets, and they're like, "I'm basically going to be your uncle, and no matter how much you screw up." Like you need to go through anger management classes. You've identified that you have a drug problem. You think you want to get into the trades. Well, I'm going to be relentless in loving and caring and trusting you. And then they reject it all the time. Right. And so over this
yeah,
process, eventually they're like, hey, man, you're doing good. Let's start to transition you off whatever money you were making and into something else. And if you don't do your job, you'll get a check for 1 penny because you weren't doing your work. Right. But that's not what the press talks about. And they do this
right,
incredible like program, 8 steps that mentorship is built in. They take rival gang members and put them on an airplane and send them to DC so that they're sitting there being peers instead of rivals. And so all of these happens. It sounds a lot like what you guys are fighting against, like perceptions and cultures and all these other things. And again, you get a little bit of money to offset some of the cost and everything. The same thing in this program. But this program is like after it's like graduate level of what you guys do. Like nobody's gotten to
right.
these kids, or they just have been abused for however long. They got off track when they were 12, which happens all the time in hard places. What do you
Yeah,
think about a program like that reliably and measurably gets look, they don't catch all of them. They don't save all of them. Some of them die, some of them end up in prison for a long time. But the vast majority of them, if they get into this program, they end up becoming in a fairly short amount of time, like the off ramp is created. And as much as they don't want to be on the off ramp, because they're wired to screw up, that uncle sits there and just like, Nick, come on, we'll just get off on the next off ramp. We'll just keep doing this until they get it right. And sometimes they even go to
yeah,
prison in between while they're in the program, right? But they get them out, and all of a sudden they're tradesmen, they're steam fitters, they're whatever they want to be. They become that thing. But but we get hung up on the stupid stipend, and the stipend is not 10 grand a month. It's just like, hey,
Right.
you're doing good work.
The it's the carrot, right? Like, obviously the stick hasn't worked. If that worked all the time, then everyone coming out of prison would never go back, right?
Right.
Right. At that point, like we were trying to lower recidivism rates or anything, but again, being understanding how trauma can do itself and unlocking it for somebody else and saying, you know what, you have this trauma. What makes you feel better? Well, it makes me feel
Right.
better when I am really jazzed up. Okay, well, that means you have a kinetic output. So, you know what? When you really start feeling this way,
Yeah.
instead of getting in a fight or going to drugs, go for a run, right?
Yeah.
So you can self regulate in a way. Like, listen, parenting really all is about helping a little human being become a big human being who can self regulate. At the end of the day, that we can call it a bunch of different names or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever. But at the end of the day, like it's just someone who can go into a situation and not lose their crap and
Right.
actually self-regulate and have a little bit of self-control and help others along the way. Right. That's really what
I got my hand
adulthood.
raised so I can ask a question.
That's adulthood. Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is great. I love that you're talking about this because we're at the dawn, and we're actually past on first light is shown on this era of understanding our genes and how much we are wired. So forget the trauma side, right? And we have this, the science is in on this. The amount of space a parent has to improve a kid is very small and very hard to repeat because once you put in genes are half of it. But if that parent can learn to navigate through the gene set, and right now we're kind of guessing, we're like, you seem to have a problem with food. A lot of that's going to be ingrained. Some of that's going to be reinforced by trauma. How do we deal with this? Whatever these things are, you can start to give your kid the tools to overcome those things, right? And this
Yep.
is going to be a fascinating next 25 years as we learn more and more about how pre-programmed we are for certain behaviors. It's not an
Uh,
outcome, but it
well,
is it is a propensity,
yeah, talk about trauma based. Trauma can actually pass up to 3 generations through the genes. So
Mhm.
you might be dealing with food trauma because your grandpa was raised during the depression and went without food.
Yeah.
And you actually have problems with food trauma that you don't even know, right?
Yeah.
But being able to say, okay, within this framework, how can I how can I work on getting the thinking brain involved,
Totally.
right? Because we can actually train the brain, right? This is what we
Right.
do in the military. Okay.
Yeah.
Fight,
Yeah.
flight, or freeze. Okay.
Right.
How many
I
people
love that you put freeze in there too. Everybody always forgets freeze. Yeah.
how many people when they get into combat, right, would freeze because someone's shooting at them? A whole
Right.
heck of a lot, right? But what
Yeah.
do we do? What do we do through our training, through our military training? Our training is basically, no, we're going to think through the chaos. Okay.
Right.
Like you can actually train the brain to do this.
Yeah.
But to train the brain to do it, you have to recognize those issues. And so being trauma informed isn't just for people who have kids who came through foster care. It's for understanding your own traumas and also understanding your own child, who by the way, you passed down some genes, or during while they were in the womb, there was trauma through the pregnancy, or a whole list of things that can happen. And we're starting to again, the Connected Mind is a great
Yeah.
book and a great resource to really focus on how all this stuff really is connected.
Yeah.
Uh, and not just to say identify the problem, but really be solution based. That's why I like TBR, because it's solution
Yeah.
based. Okay, we know this now. How do we actually help it? Not necessarily fix it, but how do we get it to where a child can self regulate? Right. So, like,
Fascinating.
my young daughter, like if she gets really amped up, she has to be alone. Right. And so we've talked to her like, okay, listen, when you're starting to feel a certain way,
Mhm.
you need to go off by yourself. And that's fine. Like she'll disappear, right? But that's great. Like she's self-regulating. So like she'll go in the pool. She loves being in the water because how it feels on her skin. And so she'll go in the pool, but it gets too much with the people in the pool. So she'll get out and then she'll go to the trampoline by herself until she calms down, and then she'll come back in the pool. We don't have to do that anymore, right? we
Mhm.
we we walk through what that means, and so now she's able to self-regulate to help go through this stuff, and that's kind of the success, right? That's the my child's self-regulating. Like,
Yeah.
yay. Like, we'll take the win. So,
There's a book called Blueprint you guys should all check out by Robert Plomin. I'm gonna try to get him on the show, and he talks a lot about this advancement of genes and how we understand about our own behavior and how that grandpa informs your genetic thing and how like our genes as parents drive how we parent on it's all once you start accounting for this genetic modeling, and then trying to counteract the bad and accentuate the good, and boy, it's fascinating. We get a question via text from another Martin, and
okay.
Nathan wants to know, and I want to kind of make this a complex question so we can round out these last 10 minutes here.
Yep,
He
no
says,
problem.
"Hey, ask Nathan what he sees as the biggest bureaucratic obstacles to foster care and or adoption today. Plus, I want to add in there is this political divide on how we're going to care for kids. We seem to want to put other things in front of caring for kids. If you have a solution, then that works. Like again, we have Planned Parenthood, which provides a lot of. I went to Planned Parenthood for my vasectomy. Hey, great. You know, no one's got a problem with that. But we also have these moms and dads that are like, hey, if you're going to have a kid, you have support, let us help you. Well, we don't like that in some cases. Well, how can these things coexist? So talk about the barriers politically, bureaucratically between becoming and also adoption somehow has become bad for some people. Like, oh, we'd rather these kids stay in these spots. We have a good friend who we talked about earlier who's
Yeah.
adopted kids out of a horrible situation. And there's this thought that if you are of a certain skin tone that you somehow can't raise a kid. So let's talk a little about barriers, politics, and the things that keep you from fostering and adoption.
Yeah. So, the barriers that people typically talking about are when kid like the bureaucracy makes the wrong decision, right, and sends a kid back, and then something bad happens. So let me address that. I want to be in a society that obviously takes care of kids. I also want to be in a society where it is extremely difficult to terminate parental rights. I don't want to be in a society where it's easy to terminate parental rights. So, just like I don't want to be in a society where it's easy to throw somebody in jail on hearsay, right? So, we have that due process, and sometimes it's frustrating, right? Sometimes people get off for a murder for a technicality, right? Just to go broad with it, okay? And sometimes the system will send a child back into an abusive situation because of a technicality, right? But those, I want it to be difficult. At the same time, though, there are things that we can do to make it a little better. So, for example, the biggest bureaucracy that we've seen is around medical care. Our we've had children who've had to have blood tests on a regular basis to make sure that their levels are where they need to be for medical intervention. Okay. Now you can understand how it would be important to be able to get that information as quickly as possible. Because we're foster parents, we don't get access to that. Like, so there's an app, my chart, where if it was our child, we would be able to get the results within minutes. Because we're foster parents, though, we don't get access to that side of it. So we have to wait until some nurse finds it, contacts another nurse, who then contacts us. So we have a 2 to 3 delay on important medical results, because if the levels were out, we need to get to the hospital right away. Well, we don't know for 2 or 3 days. So, see what I'm saying?
Can't
Like,
that
there's
be
stuff.
a power of attorney though, or something? Can't a judge be like, you have power of attorney medical?
No, because the county is the actual person who has um, custody of the children, not us. We're basically like, in a non-perfect explanation, we're basically like the babysitters, right?
Right. Right.
Nobody's giving power of attorney to their babysitter to get medical, right? So in this case, the county is the parent. They're actually the person in charge. Now, things that we've done bureaucratically well here in Ohio is something called Prudent Parent. So it used to be that a foster parent couldn't do anything with the child without permission from a supervisor. So they want to go to a sleepover, have to have supervisor permission. They want to go on a field trip at school, has to have a supervisor sign off on it. You want to get their hair cut, supervisor has to sign off on it. You want your mom who has watched your 6 biological children to also watch your 3 foster children. They need to get certified and go through classes. Okay. Well, prudent parent, what that does is basically says we're empowered as foster parent, with a couple exceptions, medical care, stuff like that. We're empowered to actually make those decisions on behalf of our children. So we can sign the field trip permission slip. Not a problem. We can let our children do a sleepover. We can, if we would have that babysitter for our children, we can have that babysitter whether they're certified through the foster system or not. Watch our foster children, right? So there are some things that bureaucratically have been done right, but there are some states who don't have that prudent parent, and that's definitely a bureaucratic obstacle to good care because you're basically telling that child at every turn, you're not, you're different. Oh yeah, your entire class is going on a field trip. I'm sorry, the director wasn't able to sign your
Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, you get to stay back in the classroom like the other random kid who wasn't able to. Yeah, it's not good for continuous care.
What's up with the political aspect? Why do people hate the let's take care of babies if they're going to be born? Why do people hate the idea of adoption, especially, oh my gosh, adopting somebody that has slightly different skin tone than you?
Yeah, I think it goes to really. So I'm gonna dig really close into. I think it really has to do with critical race theory and a bunch of other nonsense. It's reverse racism. I have 3 daughters who are African American, and there are people who legitimately think that I shouldn't have been able to adopt them because they're a different race. And let me tell you, it's not freaking white nationalists who have a problem with that. It is people who are liberals and on the left who have a problem with that. Those are the people that are pointing it out. You know,
Are
I
they fostering or adopting kids at all, or are they just pointing fingers at something they're not willing to do?
they're wanting to put in a framework because they're like, well, it's a better situation for a child to be adopted by somebody of their own race. Okay, well, that's not. I'm. We're so you're based off of color of skin. You want to rip these children out of our home who have been in our home for a very long time, simply because we're a different skin color. And I think that's just it's inappropriate. It's nonsense. And thank God we have a federal law that bans it. So they specifically are not allowed to have race enter into the conversation of whether we were able to adopt our daughters. And I'm thankful for that law because there are certain people who honestly feel that we shouldn't be able to.
Man, I want to wrap this thing up on a positive note. So,
Okay, let's do it.
obviously, kids first. And look, if nobody else thanks you two today, you and Mandy, thank you so much for what you guys do. I mean, I know better than to say I want to go out and become a foster parent. I have enough charitable things that I do, but you really put into my heart, like, yeah. And a friend of mine that he's a new friend, but he's just already a great friend. He and his wife, they're in their basically early 40s, and they're like, we want to have a kid together. And I'm like, man, there are so many kids that are already out there that you could lean on instead of being, full-time parents until you're in your 60s. Oh my gosh, why don't you just, there are so many people out there. So those of us
Yeah.
that have some capacity, I encourage you to look into something like adoption or fostering or whatever it's going to be. And look,
Yep.
if you fall out within now and 3 years, well, you're part of the norm. Okay, great. It
And
didn't work out. But if it works, oh man.
and if you're someone in your situation where you're like, you know what, I just can't foster at this stage of my life, adopt a foster family. Find someone with whether it's in your church or your community who they foster, and just go to them and say, "Hey, is there anything I can do to help you out? Listen, is it a matter of I'll cut your grass? Okay,
Yeah.
so I can do. I can do to help because you're focused on the lives of those children. I can't do it myself,
Yeah.
but let me tell you, if you do that, the length of time that a foster family stays in the system fostering grows exponentially.
Of course. Of course.
So
So you don't have
even in
to
your
do the full
situation,
thing. Yeah, you don't
no,
need the full Monty, so to speak. You can really
no,
just step out.
absolutely.
Can I go to the grocery store for you twice a month with a list? Yes. Oh my God, you know how helpful that would be? I don't want to go to the grocery store myself. Now imagine if you're shopping for a bunch of extra kids. Oh, I love it, man. All right. So in closing, everybody should go check out Facebook. You should go and check out the Fostering Grace blog so you can learn more about this. Listen, if you had a problem with our conversation, lighten up a little bit. We're just trying to take care of kids here, and maybe you've got a better solution, so go do it.
Yeah.
Everybody should go do it. If you got a better idea, please go do it. There's the link for Fostering Grace. Subscribe to the Break It Down show. Is that hard to do? I don't think so. And if you really want to help, go to the PayPal link inside of the Break It Down show page, breakitdownshow.com. Go to the PayPal link. And look, if you put in $5 or $10 a month in there, that enables me to put gas in the truck and get on the road. I'm going to drive across country for Save the Brave. If you want to get involved with that, that's again, just help me put some gas in the tank, or just go to savethebrave.org and contribute. We're trying to keep veterans alive. And then when the inevitable does happen, how do we get these parents back on their feet with the ones that are left? You know, it's a tragedy. It's devastating. And with your guys' help, we can lean on the problem like nobody else can. I'll say this right now, Nathan, the Break It Down show is proud to be a supporter, a strong supporter of Save the Brave. And I have seen a lot of charities out there. There's no charity that works harder than we do. We are always working on things. Here I am running my yap about it. What do you want to plug for your own ends? And then do your final word, and then I'll shut us down.
Yeah, so go to Fostering Grace, and also on the term of veterans and helping veterans. Me and my brother started Grant and Patton Cigar Club to be able to build community, because it might be around a cigar, it might be over a drink of bourbon, but encouraging conversations, because we're losing way too many people who I served with, friends of mine who are going through a lot of stress, and they just don't want to talk about it. But maybe over a cigar or a bourbon, they'd be willing to talk about it, and maybe that saves their life. And at the very least, being able to connect people, veterans who are older veterans and younger veterans, through that community, through that shared bond, over a cigar and maybe some whiskey is helpful. So go to Grant and Patton Cigar Club and support us there. But also Fostering Grace, you can find us there. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM us on Fostering Grace. If you have your fostering journey, or you want resources, or any, if you also want to know about if you have a church that wants to start a fostering support group like we have at our church, we can get you plugged into that as well.
Trying to get the Grant and Pat Cigar Club. What is the link for that? So I can put that here in the notes.
It's Grant and Patton's Cigar Club.
Patton, P-T-O-N?
P-A-T-T-O-N, yeah. Grant and Patton's, should be grantandpattoncigarclub.com. You'd think I would have that memorized by now.
Well, it's complicated. We got some possession and some plurals. Yeah. And so here we go. This, we believe, is the link. And he also assuming that I typed it in right. Because
let me check it. It might be. I probably should just check this out. It should be.
You check it. I'll stall for a second. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Oh man. Let's see here. I'm gonna get ready to wrap.
Yeah. It's grantandpattons.com.
Grant and Pattons. Okay. Grant and now you got
Pattons.com. So
Pattons.com.
Yep.
Or more. Okay. I'm going to put that into the comments. Go check that out, you guys. Get involved with Save the Brave, or I'm going to come twist your arm. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to do it. All right. Stand by for 1 second, Nathan. Let me shut this thing down. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down show.